January 10th, 1969. Twickenham Film Studios, West London. The morning is grey and cold, matching the mood inside the cavernous film studio where the Beatles have been attempting to rehearse new material for what will eventually become the Let It Be album. Cameras are rolling, capturing every moment for a documentary that was supposed to show the Beatles' creative process, but is instead documenting their disintegration. The heating barely works in the converted aircraft hangar. Everyone is tired, irritable, and increasingly aware that something fundamental has broken between them. George Harrison sits with his guitar, quiet and withdrawn. He's been like this for days, subdued, barely speaking, his face set in an expression that could be mistaken for boredom, but is actually suppressed rage. He's 25 years old, no longer the baby-faced teenager who joined John and Paul's band because he was a brilliant guitarist. He's a grown man, a talented songwriter in his own right, someone who's traveled to India, studied with Ravi Shankar, written songs that millions of people love. But in this room, with these people, he still feels like the junior member, the kid who should be grateful just to be here. Paul is at the piano, working through a new song, explaining to the others how it should go. His voice has that patient but slightly condescending tone that's become increasingly common. The tone of a teacher explaining something simple to slow students. "If we could just get the tempo right," Paul is saying. "George, if you could try it more like this." He demonstrates a guitar part on air guitar, humming the notes. George doesn't move. He's heard this before. Paul telling him how to play guitar, as if George hasn't been playing guitar since he was 13, as if George didn't teach Paul half of what Paul knows about the instrument. "I'll play it the way I think it should be played," George says quietly, his voice flat. Paul looks up, surprised by the pushback. "I'm just suggesting—" "I know what you're suggesting," George interrupts. "You're suggesting I don't know how to play my own instrument. You're suggesting that your way is better than my way. You're suggesting, like you always do, that I'm not good enough to make my own musical decisions." The room goes quiet. John, sitting nearby, looks up from the guitar he's been tuning. Ringo stops adjusting his drums. Even the film crew seems to sense something is happening, cameras still rolling but the operators exchanging glances. Paul's face flushes. "That's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to control everything," George says, louder now. "Like you always do. Every song, every arrangement, every note has to be exactly how Paul McCartney wants it. Well, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being told how to play. I'm tired of being treated like a session musician in my own band." Paul stands up from the piano. "That's not fair. We've always collaborated, always worked together to make the songs better." George laughs, but there's no humor in it. "Collaborated? Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, collaboration means you tell me what to play, and I either do it or we argue until I'm too exhausted to fight anymore. That's not collaboration, Paul. That's dictatorship." John finally speaks up, his voice carrying a note of warning. "George, calm down. Let's not—" But George turns on John too, years of resentment erupting. "Don't tell me to calm down. You're just as bad as he is. You and Paul, you've been running this band since the beginning, and the rest of us are just here to back you up. My songs? They're filler. They're what you put on the albums when you need to pad out the track listing because you've run out of Lennon and McCartney songs." "That's not true," John says, but his voice lacks conviction. "Isn't it?" George challenges. "How many of my songs made it onto Sgt. Pepper? 1. Within You Without You. And you all hated it. You thought it was weird and self-indulgent. How many of my songs on the White Album? 4 out of 30. And I had to fight for every single one of them. I had to argue and defend and justify why my songs deserve to exist alongside yours." He stands up, putting his guitar back in its case with hands that are shaking with emotion. "I've written some good songs. Really good songs. While my guitar gently weeps, something, Here Comes the Sun. These are songs people love. Frank Sinatra called Something one of the greatest love songs ever written. But you two act like I should be grateful you're letting me contribute at all. Paul tries to interject. George, nobody thinks that. Yes, you do. George's voice echoes in the large space. You absolutely do think that. Every time I present a song, you pick it apart. You suggest changes. You question my chord choices, my lyrics, my arrangements. But when John brings in a song, you treat it with respect. When you bring in a song, Paul, everyone's expected to realize your genius and just execute your vision. But my songs, they're not good enough as written. They need the Lennon and McCartney polish. He turns to face them fully now, his usual gentle demeanor completely gone. Do you know what it's like? Being the quiet Beatle? The young one, the one who's supposed to be grateful just to be in the room with the great Lennon and McCartney. I've been doing this for almost as long as you have. I was 15 when I joined this band. 15. I've given my entire adult life to the Beatles, and I'm still treated like the kid who doesn't really belong. Ringo speaks quietly from behind his drums. George, we don't think... Ringo, you're the only one who treats me like an equal, George says, his voice softening slightly. The only one who listens when I have an idea, who doesn't automatically assume his way is better. But these two... He gestures at John and Paul. They can't even conceive of a world where George Harrison might know something they don't. John's patience is wearing thin. You're being dramatic. If you've got such a problem with how things are run, maybe you should... Should what? George demands. Should leave. Is that what you were going to say? Well, maybe I should. Maybe I should walk out right now and let the two of you figure out how to be the Beatles without me. You've certainly made it clear over the years that I'm replaceable. Just another guitarist. Anyone with technical skill could do what I do, right? Nobody said that, Paul says, but his voice wavers. George picks up his guitar case. You didn't have to say it. It's in every interaction we have. It's in the way you dismiss my suggestions. It's in the way you limit my songs on the albums. It's in the way you talk to me, like I'm a student and you're the teachers. I'm done with it. I'm done being the third wheel in the great Lennon-McCartney partnership. He starts walking toward the door. Paul moves to stop him. George, don't do this. We need to talk this through. George stops, turns back. When he speaks, his voice is cold and controlled. Talk it through? Like we've talked through everything else, where you explain why your way is right and my way is wrong, where you make me feel small for even suggesting something different. No thanks, I've had enough talking. So you're just going to quit? John asks, his tone somewhere between angry and disbelieving. After everything we've been through together, after everything we've built? What have we built? George asks. We've built the Lennon-McCartney empire. I'm just a supporting player. And you know what? I'm a supporting player who's tired of playing support. I want to make my own music, on my own terms, without having to justify every decision to two people who think they know better than everyone else. He looks at each of them in turn. I've been writing songs. Good songs. Songs that I believe in. And I'm tired of having to beg for the privilege of including them on Beatles albums. I'm tired of watching you two collaborate on brilliant songs while I sit in the corner, waiting for permission to contribute. I'm tired of being treated like I should be grateful for the scraps from the Lennon-McCartney table. Paul's voice is desperate now. We don't think of you that way. We value your contributions. Your guitar work is essential to our sound. My guitar work, George repeats bitterly. Exactly. You value what I can do for your songs. But you don't value my songs. You don't value my vision. You don't value me as a creative equal. And after all these years, I'm finally realizing I don't have to accept that. John stands up, moving closer. George, you're upset. I get it. We've all been under a lot of pressure. But walking out isn't the answer. Maybe it is, George says. Maybe the answer is that the Beatles have run their course. We've made incredible music together. We've had an amazing run. But we're not the same people we were when we started. We've grown in different directions. You and Paul want to keep being the Beatles. I want to be George Harrison. He shifts his guitar case to his other hand. You want to know what really did it? What finally broke me? It was yesterday. We were working on two of us, one of Paul's songs, and I suggested a guitar part. Just a simple little riff that I thought would add something. And you know what Paul said? He said, "That's not quite right, George. Let me show you what I'm hearing." And he took my guitar and demonstrated what he wanted me to play. On my guitar, like I was incapable of understanding music without him demonstrating it for me like I was a child. Paul's face goes pale. I was just trying to communicate the idea. You were treating me like an employee, George says. Like someone you hired to execute your vision, not like a partner, not like someone who's been playing guitar longer than you have, not like someone who might actually have valid musical ideas that differ from yours. He continues, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. And John, you just sat there. You watched Paul do that, and you didn't say anything, because you agree with him. You think I'm the junior member too. You think my job is to make your song sound good, not to have ideas of my own. John opens his mouth to protest, then closes it. He can't argue because there's truth in what George is saying. I've been patient, George says. I've waited my turn. I've accepted being the third songwriter, the quiet one, the spiritual one, whatever label you wanted to put on me. But patience has its limits, and I've reached mine. He looks around the studio one more time, at the cameras still rolling, at the other Beatles standing there, unable to stop him, at the space that suddenly feels suffocating. I'll tell you what I want. I want to make music without having to fight for the right to exist. I want to write songs without having to justify why they deserve to be recorded. I want to play guitar without being told I'm doing it wrong. I want to be respected as an artist, not tolerated as a sideman. We do respect you, Ringo says quietly. George smiles sadly at Ringo. I know you do, Ringo. You've always been good to me, but respect from 1 out of 3 bandmates isn't enough. Not anymore. Paul makes one last attempt. If you leave now, it might be permanent. This might be the end of the Beatles. George considers this, then nods slowly. Maybe that's okay. Maybe the Beatles need to end. Maybe we've stayed together too long already, held on past the point where it was healthy. Maybe the best thing we could do for our legacy is recognize when it's time to stop. You don't mean that, John says, but his voice lacks certainty. Don't I? George asks. Ask yourself honestly, John, are you happy? Is this fun anymore? Or are we just going through the motions, trading on past glory, pretending we're still the 4 guys who conquered the world together? Because I'm not happy. I haven't been happy in this band for a long time, and life's too short to be unhappy. He walks toward the door again. This time, nobody tries to stop him. As he reaches it, he turns back one final time. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm not trying to be dramatic or make a point. I'm just being honest for once. I'm tired of being the smallest voice in the room. I'm tired of being overlooked. I'm tired of being treated like I should be grateful just to be here. So I'm leaving. Maybe for a few days, maybe forever. But I'm leaving. What do you want us to do? Paul asks, his voice small. George pauses, considering. I want you to think about how you treat people. I want you to consider whether you'd want to be in a band with yourselves. I want you to imagine what it's like to have your ideas constantly dismissed, your contributions minimized, your worth determined by 2 people who think they're always right. And then I want you to decide if that's really the kind of band you want to be. He opens the door. Cold air rushes in from outside. I'll be at home if you decide you're ready to treat me like an equal. But if you just want another guitarist who'll do what he's told, you can hire someone else. There are plenty of talented musicians in London who'd love to be in the Beatles, even in a diminished capacity. But I'm not one of them anymore. George Harrison walks out, leaving his 3 bandmates standing in stunned silence. The cameras keep rolling, capturing the aftermath. Paul with his head in his hands, John lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers, Ringo staring at the door as if George might come back through it any second. But George doesn't come back. Not that day. He goes home to his wife Patty, tells her he's quit the Beatles, and for the first time in months, he feels like he can breathe. He spends the next week writing music, playing his guitar without anyone telling him he's doing it wrong, imagining a future where he's not the junior member of someone else's band. The Beatles don't rehearse for several days. Paul and John try to continue without George, but it feels empty, wrong. They realize, perhaps for the first time, how much George has been contributing. Not just his guitar work, which is irreplaceable, but his presence, his perspective, his quiet steadiness. Eventually, John and Ringo visit George at his home. They apologize. They promise to do better. They acknowledge that George has been treated unfairly. Whether they truly understand what George was saying or whether they just want him back because they can't imagine being the Beatles without him is unclear. But George agrees to return with conditions. More songs on the albums, more respect for his ideas, more equality in decision-making. He comes back, but something has changed. George is no longer the quiet one willing to accept whatever role he's given. He's established his boundaries, proven he's willing to walk away. And from that point forward, the dynamics in the band shift slightly. Not completely. Paul and John are still the dominant forces. But there's a new wariness in how they interact with George, a recognition that he's no longer the kid who'll accept anything just to stay in the band. What George Harrison said when he was ready to walk out on the Beatles was simple but profound. He said he was tired of being small, tired of being overlooked, undervalued, treated as less than. He said he deserved respect as an artist, not just as a sideman. He said he'd rather be alone than be diminished. And in saying those things, he forced the Beatles to confront uncomfortable truths about power, ego, and the way they treated each other. His walkout in January 1969 didn't end the Beatles. They'd continue for another year and a half, but it was a warning sign, a crack in the foundation that would eventually widen into a chasm. George had shown that the Beatles weren't invincible, that their partnership wasn't guaranteed, that even the quiet one had limits. And when George finally did leave for good, when the Beatles officially dissolved, nobody was surprised. He'd told them exactly what would happen if things didn't change. They'd had their warning, they just hadn't been able to heed it.